Next week on 60 Minutes, for 20 years now, Jorge Sandoval has lived in New Zealand, and for 20 years he's carried his nightmares.
One New Zealander's emotional return to a tortured past.
They take you up to a chair with electric shock in your private part, with your head inside a deep bucket of water full of excrement, urine, and everything.
Wellingtonian Jorge Sandoval travels back to Chile to confront his memories and lay some old ghosts to rest.
Did you ever beat this boy at the police station?
No, never.
That's Jorge Sandoval confronting his past here on 60 Minutes next week. Join me then at 7:30 on Channel 2. Until then, good night.
For 20 years, life in New Zealand has been sweet for Jorge Sandoval. But tonight he makes an emotional return to Chile, the land where he lost his innocence.
The smell of blood is still in my mind, you know?
Jorge Sandoval, confronting his tortured past and the people who still haunt him.
Vecino, ¿cómo le va?
Did you ever beat this boy at the police station?
Ladies and gentlemen, Murray Fields.
Murray Fields is a TV star and comedian who's as Aussie as the outback.
So you're still appreciating a beer, Maury?
Well, only with friends and strangers and people I don't know very well.
For 50 years now, he's been travelling the country pubs in search of material. Tonight, Murray Fields in the Red Centre in search of a laugh.
These stories and more with Joanna Paul, John Hudson, Genevieve Westcott, and Pauline Hudson.
Kia ora, welcome to another 60 Minutes of current affairs from across New Zealand and around the world. Later, we know him as Vic in The Flying Doctors, but Murray Fields is also a fair dinkum Aussie comic. Also Jorge, the Wellington man with a tortured past. But next, they're calling it the biggest cover-up in decades. At last, the cigarette scientists speak out. When Jorge Sandoval came to New Zealand as a political refugee 20 years ago, he brought his nightmares with him. Until tonight, Jorge has kept his tortured past a secret he wants to share now so that Kiwis can understand how good life is in God's own. As a young man in his native Chile, Jorge Sandoval was denied the freedom we take for granted and subjected to the worst abuses imaginable, simply because he didn't agree with his government's ideas. Tonight, Genevieve Westcott with the inspiring story of Jorge Sandoval.
Jorge Sandoval revels in his daily rides along Wellington's waterfront. He says it reminds him that he is now free, that he is still alive. Jorge has lived in the capital for 20 years now. He's raised a family and established himself as one of the leading lights on the cycling scene.
A little bit of...
Currently, he's organizing an international race for later this year.
Yeah. So what we had to do, identify each team with different sort of colors. So after 1 or 2 days of racing, everybody will know which team is who.
Cycling is Jorge's life, but behind this picture of success lies a dark past, a past hidden away until tonight. This is where Jorge's haunting story begins. Today, he's making a bittersweet return home to the small Chilean town of Tomé, where he grew up. 20 years ago, he fled here as a political refugee. Today, he's come back to lay some old ghosts to rest.
Over the years, I met a lot of friends in New Zealand, and not many of them know this is going to be the first time they're going to find out about me.
Jorge's life today is a world away from the year of torture he endured as a schoolboy here in Tomé.
My memories, you know, the smell of blood is still in my mind, you know.
This was Jorge's Chile back in 1973, when General Augusto Pinochet seized power in a bloody and brutal military coup. Jorge was just 17. Like thousands of other Chileans, his only crime was supporting this man, Salvador Allende, the Marxist president Pinochet murdered. Like many of Allende's supporters, Jorge was arrested and imprisoned. It would become 12 months of a living hell.
And then he got his gun and put it right into my mouth, with everything in my mouth. And I started crying. What else can I do? I don't want to play tough man here. I was just a kid.
For 17 years, Pinochet and his murderous military ruled with an iron fist. His own people, the victims of the worst human rights abuses imaginable. Thousands of Chileans simply disappeared. Thousands more were murdered in cold blood. Torture was a fact of life. Imprisoned in concentration camps, the victims were innocent men, women, and children. One of them was Jorge. It's been 20 years since Jorge walked free from that concentration camp and escaped from Chile. Since then, for 2 decades, his memories have remained locked inside of himself. Terrible secrets he's harbored from his family and his friends. But now on this voyage home, he's come back to confront the past and the people who still haunt him. But today is a time for celebration. It's election day in Chile, a day many people here thought they'd never see again. These are the first democratic presidential elections to be held in 20 years. They mark the end of General Pinochet's dictatorship, the end of his reign of terror.
It's so special because people had to wait almost 20 years to go to an election.
It's a celebration of a new democracy.
Yes, no matter who wins today, people is just happy to be able to vote and say what they think.
For Jorge's father, René, this is both historic and poignant. When he last voted 20 years ago, his son Jorge was a schoolboy, too young to cast his own ballot, but not too young to be taken away, tortured, and imprisoned. It happened in September 1973. Overhead, Pinochet's jet signaled the start of the coup, the start of the crackdown. Fearing the worst, Jorge and some of his school chums went to ground in the nearby hills. Jorge was a known supporter of the murdered president. He says he wanted to protect his family.
You had to hide because otherwise they come and get you in your house and they break the house, television, anything on their way, they just kick it out. And about 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we saw helicopters, 2 helicopters in the air, and we just hide under the trees. And then about 5 minutes later, they turn around and start shooting at us from the air. So
they were shooting at you from the air?
Yeah.
What did you do?
We just ran. And as soon as we arrived in the bushes, we saw the soldiers standing here, about 20 of them. And they was pointing at us, so they say, they caught us with the guns like this, you know? We was tied up, blindfolded, and taken to a truck which was about 800 meters away. Put into the truck and drive home right outside my house where my mother was watching us, you know, going down.
Jorge's mother, Esmeralda, could only watch in horror as her son was taken away.
Bueno, yo me encontraba dentro.
She just couldn't believe it. And then she started crying and she just couldn't believe it. The biggest fear she got was that she thought that what they done to the others was gonna happen to me, which means I was gonna get shot or killed or tortured.
Esmeralda Sandoval had good reason to worry about her son. Jorge was taken to Tomé jail and subjected to the most horrific torture.
They then tie you up to a chair, put electric shock in your private part, in your tongue, get your nails off, your feet, your hands, put your head inside a deep bucket of water full of excrement, urine, and everything, and keep hitting you all the time.
For 2 decades, neither Jorge nor his father, René, have talked openly to each other about what happened after Jorge was arrested. That changed during this visit. Rene was ready to share some of the pain he still felt.
Every day, he remembers, every day. And every time he remembers, he's still crying.
It's hard for both father and son. There was an incident that Rene had never told Jorge about. It seems during one of the torture sessions, Jorge was beaten so badly he almost died. A young naval officer risked his own life to save Jorge and later told his father what had happened.
I never knew this. And if it wasn't for that sailor, I would have died because people won't last one night there and the way I was. The sailor come tell my father crying. What happens? And I never knew about that.
Jorge's interrogation at the Tomé jail lasted more than 2 weeks, but even then the nightmare wasn't over. He was shipped off to a concentration camp on Kirikina Island, a prison crowded with more than 3,000 political prisoners, a living hell Jorge's family could see from their home.
Jorge Sandoval wanted to take us back to the concentration camp. It's on the island behind us, just a short ferry ride away. But despite several requests, the military turned us down.
Democracy may have come to Chile, but it seems even today, the military doesn't want to remember those terrible years. Life on the island was unbearable. It was a time of military rule, routine, and fear. 3,700 men, women, and children were forced to sleep in an abandoned building. The lucky ones huddled 5 to a mattress. Death for some became the only escape.
I saw someone trying to take his own life many times. One of them was living next to me one night, and my friend sort of touched the ground and felt something warm, and then he realized it was blood. And the guy next to him cut his wrist when he went to bed and tried to kill himself. We didn't die in the tortures, and then this guy was trying to kill himself.
It was a time that pitted friend against friend, father against son, and in Jorge's case, brother against brother. In a bizarre twist, Jorge's own brother was a Navy guard, a guard at the very prison where Jorge was being held. His name was Eduardo. Jorge lived in constant fear that someone would discover they were related. If their secret was exposed, it could have meant certain death for both of them.
Did your brother ever have to beat you on orders?
He had to give me what they call the prisoner treatment, which is kick and push.
Today, Jorge's brother regrets what happened, but he says he doesn't know what else he could have done.
As he said, they receive orders and they have to do what they're told.
Women were particularly abused on the island.
They used to rape wives of prisoners, you know, daughters of old men, you know. They were the authorities, so they did anything they was able to do.
But amidst all the memories of torture and abuse, there is one powerful moment that Jorge can never forget. It happened one Christmas Eve.
Someone started playing this Holy Night song from Christmas in a flute for those men there, away from their families and their sons and daughters. It was so painful, they started crying. I couldn't understand why they was crying until 10, 12 years later when I got my own family, my own son, my daughters, and I loved them so much. And now I know why they was crying for.
Thousands of people like Jorge were murdered during the Pinochet regime. Jorge was one of the lucky ones. He was eventually released. But his best friend Fernando was murdered on the island. Jorge has never been able to bring himself to visit the grave until today.
This is the first time since I left the concentration camp that I come near them. And in the afternoon at about this time, 4 o'clock, we was playing soccer in the swimming pool in the concentration camp, and he was playing in my side. And then all of a sudden the soldiers called him, 3 of them, and everybody stood there because we know exactly what's going to happen to them, and they knew too. Fernando didn't even cry. He just said, they're going to kill me, and now they're going to kill me. And they tied him up and they took them. And that was on a Saturday afternoon when they killed him.
There is one final ghost Jorge must confront on this journey. It is his neighbor, Victor Aravina. He was a policeman when Jorge was first arrested.
Vecino, ¿cómo le va?
He was one of his torturers.
How can this guy live next door to me, you know? I would like to ask him why he was so worried and scared about me when I was a 16, 17-year-old. He got the power of the moment and he abused me when I was blindfolded.
But it seems the policeman remembers none of it.
No recuerdo yo.
No recuerda.
No recuerdo yo.
No recuerda.
Did you ever beat this boy at the police station?
No, sí, no.
Never.
Yo no le puedo contestar nada. Eran 2 preguntas.
He doesn't want to answer anymore because it was only 2 questions. He doesn't want
He's
to talk
only
anymore.
going to give me 2. Okay. Thank you very much. Gracias.
Adiós.
Oh.
Yeah, ciao, gracias.
Ciao.
Most of the men from the old regime have never been brought to justice, including the former dictator, Pinochet. But the people of Chile are determined that their 17 years of terror and the thousands of innocent victims will never be forgotten. Tonight, there is a new age in Chile, a new democracy to celebrate. And for Jorge's family, the happiness of knowing that their son has built a new future out of the ashes of a tortured past.
In New Zealand, anybody can have anything. I got the most precious thing in my life, which is a freedom and my family.